Good morning again. I'm so glad to be the guest preacher this morning. For those who I might not know, I'm Reverend Elizabeth Wynn, but sometimes more famously known as Elena and Tatiana's mom. And I'm one of the affiliated community ministers here at First Parish in Malden, and I do full-time social justice work, so I am not often in the pulpit, but very glad to be here this morning. Like any good myth, the myth of the volcano Tanupa has a variety of versions. In one, she marries her lover, another volcano, Cusco, but he runs away from her and she begins to cry. In another, the story is that in ancient times, volcanoes could actually move freely, roaming the high plains of Bolivia. And Tanupa was pregnant and didn't know who the father of her baby volcano was. The male volcanoes and the myth fought amongst each other to be recognized as the father and eventually kidnapped the baby volcano and hid him. The gods were then angry. In every good myth, the gods become angry at the fighting volcanoes and so took away their ability to move and speak, leaving all volcanoes permanently fixed to the ground and silent as we know them today, and leaving Tanupa unable to go and find her baby volcano child. And so she began to cry. In both myths, Tanupa's tears mixed with her breast milk, flowing to form the salt desert, the Salar de Uyuni, 10,000 square kilometers of white salt, stretching into the horizon in every direction. We are in the hemisphere opposite from the Salar de Uyuni, honoring the theme of this month's worship, Earth, in the days before Earth Day 2026. A time when I know many of us feel we are very, very far from honoring the Earth and her many dimensions and rhythms. I won't list all the big and little ways we are failing to live in reciprocity with our Earth, but we know that top of mind are the many ways that we are interconnected, the climate catastrophes, global warming, the mining of so many sacred spaces, and the huge pollution that the U.S. military brings to the world are top of my heart today. And amidst all of our grief and longing for a different relationship between humans and Earth, I invite us to even now, no matter what, connect with the earth and the things that make it up through the voice of salt, as the poet Neruda says. A few years ago, my partner put both of us in the way of awe by salt, by bringing me to the Salar de Uyuni on a moonless night so we could lie in the middle of the salt desert and be overwhelmed by the darkness and see what the darkness revealed. Constellations from the southern hemisphere, the Milky Way glowing, shooting stars. Our guide through the salt flats reminded us that the word salario, Spanish for salary, comes from the word salt. That salt has been money, is the preservative that brings us kimchi and sauerkraut, olives and jerky. That yes, wars have been fought and revolutions fomented. Salt literally melts ice and changes the properties of water. Salt water heals. The saline drops in our eyes or in Gatorade or in an IV mimics what we have inside, that balance of crystals and water. And the famous quote from the Isak Dinesen story, "The cure for anything is salt water, sweat, tears, or the sea." Miraculous and fundamental, and also such a normal part of our everyday lives. We are as close to salt right now, inside our bodies, on our tables at home, in the snacks at coffee hour, maybe cast aside from our doorsteps because we've decided it's finally spring and we don't need it at the ready anymore. If we had some right here, if we held it between our fingertips, it would be rough and smooth, quick to dissolve or maybe slow in water. And if later you bring up an image on your phone, maybe one of those really zoomed in ones, you can see that salt looks like diamonds or glass, snowflakes, a little like the Milky Way. Salt has profound meaning in many spiritual traditions, often associated with cleansing, clearing, preparing the way. Bowls of salt or salt water get placed on altars or in the corners of spaces. Bitter herbs are dipped in salt water. People are dipped in salt water. The Salar de Uyuni was formed somewhere in the grand magnitude of 25,000 to 40,000 years ago from a giant ancient lake that dried up over the years. The lake left salt as we know it, that to this day is processed locally in the Salar, and then it is the table salt, eaten daily all over Bolivia. We brought back bags of it, much to the dismay of TSA, who does not like it. We learned when you bring lots of white powders in tiny little bags across borders. All kinds of salt, the kind in the table at home, the kind surrounding us as we stared at those ancient stars, comes in some way from some ancient sea. Maybe an ancient dried lake bed, like the Salar, or the large ones in the US near Detroit, Cleveland, the Salt Lake in Utah, or collected from the Texas or Louisiana coast. It all comes from the sea, as old as anything, as old as earth. Salt of it, we sometimes say, salt of the earth. A reminder that each and every day, whether it be a normal day or an extraordinary one, joyful or devastating, we're tethered to this ancient earth that creates us still, even now. The salt we managed to bring back from Bolivia after much swiping with little pads and testing of the powders we'll use for cooking is now big crystals on top of chocolate chip cookies and steaks after grilling. The little ones we use for everything else. One of my favorite culinary lessons is the one we heard as our chalice lighting, that salt makes something taste more like itself. I love this, and I love the spiritual lesson behind it, that it doesn't reflect badly on any of us, that we need help to be most ourselves. And if you're coming to this Earth Day or just this Sunday, either here in person or on Zoom, feeling a bit underseasoned or a bit less like yourself than you might want to be, maybe this is an invitation to remember it's not that we are lacking or failures for not containing within ourselves all that we need. It's not my strength to not feel like I'm a failure for containing all that I need, and perhaps I have some solidarity. I would really rather not need, personally. I would really rather contain perfection within my cell walls if that was an option. I have come a long way. Years ago, I had to have a surgery on my eyelids, very near those precious repositories of salt water, very near my tear ducts. And I didn't bring anyone with me, a decision I deeply regretted when I found myself on the sidewalk outside of BMC, trying to hail a taxi, not able to open either eye, and crying slightly bloody, sad tears, imagining I looked sort of like something from a sad horror movie. But since then, I have very much tried to practice, tentatively, and sometimes with hesitancy and swearing, asking for what I need. To ask for help when our household moved from Boston to here in Malden a few years ago. To send that mass email or group text and be willing to be met with silence or a sincere, I wish I could, but I can't, and still be willing to ask again. To need and to ask and to let. I let my partner plan that incredible trip to the Salt Flats, even though I have a very strong muscle that wants to know all the details and plans, I was practicing, letting him dream and vision and plan and scheme about the best weekend to go with no moon and clear skies, and the hotel made of salt blocks and the wide, gleaming desert all around. I like the second version of the myth of how the salt desert came to be the best, the complicated one of how Volcano Tanupa didn't know who the other parent of her beloved baby volcano was, and how in a world before the patriarchal fighting about who would be recognized as the father, the volcanoes themselves were free to move and speak. And how even out of Tanupa's impossible sorrow, searching for her baby volcano, came this ancient, essential, delicious sea of salt, teaching us that we're not failures if we need help or seasoning. This, as Neruda calls it, crystal of the sea, oblivion of the waves, and then on every table in the world, salt. My Aunt Kath loved Earth Day. It was her great annual celebration. And she was the person who introduced my parents to Unitarian Universalism when they were a young multiracial couple, Vietnamese and Irish German, looking for a spiritual home for their kids in Knoxville, Tennessee. Kath got to celebrate Earth Day when it very first began in 1970. She was a freshman at the New York State College of Forestry. She lived a lifetime of environmental struggle, big and small, creating a jungle room for us kids full of hand-sewn pillows of frogs and fish and big leaves, and engaging in nonviolent direct action many times to fight nuclear waste dumping in her hometown. In 2010, marking the 40th anniversary of the first Earth Day, she wrote, "I sigh and wish we'd done better, screamed louder, better understood the power players, been better organizers, had lots more money, known more about the science of environmental destruction and restoration. The factors then, as now, were greed, stewardship, knowledge of the environment, and finding the will to act in a unified, powerful way." She died over a decade ago, too young, but I read her words each April. So many of the great waters of the world are drying up, and what's being left behind is more salt desert, perhaps one day not so different from the one Tanupa cried a hemisphere away. All salt connects us to some sea, a reminder of all that is ancient, all that is ordinary and extraordinary, as we try to become more ourselves, more our own ocean essence in this complicated and hard world. May we be seasoned. May we be not afraid to need or let someone else take care of us. May we become ourselves as we struggle to feel those sacred connections to this wild earth and our place in it. Amen, and may it be so.